Catherine Bubble-Singh, who's been dubbed Britain's strictest head teacher.
She runs the Michaela Community School in a deprived part of North London. The school focuses on discipline and manners.
I want you to be the head teacher of my children's school, Catherine Bubble-Singh. You talk my language. Now,
people think that I'm mean, and I'm mean because I'm the strictest headmistress in Britain, and I have rules and I have detentions and things like this. I spend all my time arguing with everybody. I'm arguing with them on Twitter. I'm arguing with them on the press, right? I'm strange that I'm willing to go out and fight every day. Most people don't want to do that.
Hello and welcome. Michaela is proudly going back in time in regards to learning. Catherine Bubble-Singh has spoken out against decolonising the curriculum and teaching skills, but her students make more academic progress, according to Progress 8, than any other school in the country. In episode 5, we discussed the limitations with Progress 8. However, Michaela seemed to be winning at the game they're playing when it comes to high academic outcomes. In this conversation, we use the word pedagogy a lot. Basically, that's just a wordy way of speaking about the method and act of teaching. The most important part of this conversation for me is where we consider the politics of the curriculum. Education is often framed as politically neutral ground, but Michaela quite openly bucks this trend, wearing its values on its sleeve. The episode is mainly made up of a conversation between Martha, Mario and I. You'll also hear from me again when I introduce some really interesting contributors, including the Teach, Sleep, Repeat podcast and Dr. Kay Sidebottom. Please don't forget to follow the podcast so you can get updates as this story develops. At the end of the episode, we'll play you a fascinating extract from an interview with a young person who attended Michaela. They had a lot to say about the school's approach to learning and the experience of being in such a high-pressure environment. I'm Jack, and this is episode 1, Learning. I think it matters for people to reflect on their experience of school, and lessons are a huge part of everyone's life. Like, we've all spent so many hours in classrooms, and sometimes it's easy to just like leave that there and move on with your life. But I think people, whether they want to or not, like, it does stick with them. So this is what I'm focusing on in this episode. I've called it like the learning experience, but basically mainly talking about classroom-based learning, talking about lessons. And so in lessons, I'm thinking about pedagogy, like the art of teaching, the processes of the teacher, like drawing out knowledge or putting knowledge in, or however you want to look at it. I'm thinking about the curriculum, so like what is taught rather than how it's taught, what's selected as important information. And then I'm also thinking a little bit about how it feels to be in those classrooms, how it feels to be in those lessons. I had a bit of a stressful time at school because I really cared about doing well, and I was stressed out because I really cared about remembering stuff and I cared about doing well in exams and stuff. So I wanted to kind of open it up to you two to start with.
So, yeah, I think it's interesting if I look back to my schools that I went to, because I went to some quite like varying schools across my childhood. Broadly, my primary school was much more, some might say kind of liberal, creative. Like, we had a head teacher that was very big on the arts and culture and bringing people from all types of backgrounds, teaching them about things like opera and taking us into London to see performances. We didn't wear a uniform, like just these kind of subtle ways of making people feel like they could be individual, versus my secondary school, which was maybe quite a bit more traditional, and we had quite a strict uniform. It was all girls. It was very much like exam and performance focused. And to be honest, now looking back over my schooling, the things I've really held on to are a lot from primary school. And I don't know if that's just because they were kind of more formative experiences of the age I was, but the knowledge I've held on to is that sort of experiential learning, and the kind of like social relationships formed off the back of that versus what I felt in my secondary school.
I think the thing that comes to mind most, art was the subject that I ended up doing at university. But at school, I had a teacher that told me I wasn't good at art. She used to rip the kids' homework up.
Right.
And even though I actually felt that I was good at art, even this idea that some kids were good at it and some kids were bad at it was just as horrific, and didn't support any of us to understand what it is to be to have an art practice, to make things creatively. And I think if our teachers at school had understood that, I could have had such a better experience at school.
Let's go to Michaela. Let's visit. So we did visit, and we were given a lovely tour, and we went into some classrooms. So what were your impressions of those rooms as you walked in? What did you notice?
I liked that they didn't have loads of tats on the walls. I fucking hate schools that have unnecessary crap all over the walls that the teachers are made to stand there, and borders. I hate there's not a border to be found, Michaela, and I loved it.
Are you taking the piss?
I'm absolutely serious. No, Jack knows.
Yeah.
I
I know you
hate
mean it, yeah.
displays. It's the most stupid thing. Have you ever seen a child stood in front of a display going, "Wow, look at this display! I'm learning so much stuff." And then Michaela, they decorated the walls, and you know what I really loved is they decorated the walls with pictures of the kids in those form groups. That was it. So I thought that was really good. That's all you need on a wall. It was a little bit drab.
That is not what I was expecting from you.
I thought I came with positive first.
Yeah, well, because my first word that came to mind was sterile, and I think that kind of like completely contradicts what you were saying. But it's interesting that you think that stuff is a distraction, because for me, not having all of that stuff that I'm used to seeing in a classroom, it was a contrast, and maybe in a negative way. I felt that the lack of colour, the lack of attention to students' work, like the very much focused just on this sorry, what are those things called? The
visualizer.
Visualizer, damn it, I forgot that word. Yeah, the forward facing students focused all on the visualizer. It just, it didn't make me think a very like interesting environment to be in day to day.
It's a good place to start, actually, because it's also a pedagogical decision. Like, if the information isn't coming off the walls, and I know that lots of classrooms just stick stuff up, and it's not particularly useful. But there is an idea as well that you can use the classroom walls as like a second teacher. But if the information isn't coming from the walls, then it's coming from the teacher only, right? That's kind of, I think, how Michaela do it. It's like they don't need to be looking at the wall because they need to be facing the front.
But I did notice that without ridiculous displays on the walls, that also means that their teachers aren't sat there after work putting up these stupid displays that I don't think teach kids anything. And I think that's great. Good for those teachers that they get to go and have use that time better than lots of other schools where they will waste time.
Fair enough.
You know what I hate so much, similar to you, are these meticulously, everything laminated, stupid wiggly border
Exactly.
displays. I mean, I'm repeating what you said. It takes so long to make.
I refuse.
But the other option is that you can just whack stuff on the wall in a way that doesn't take you very long as a teacher. This is my personal approach. Is like my walls, my boards are a mess, but they're full of things that I know, I hope, are genuinely useful to the children, because I don't have time to answer everyone's questions. So if someone is asking for a spelling, for example, I'm going to write it on the wall, because it's there. And then so this is the other thing, is like, it's very telling that their walls are blank, because it suggests that there is one place the information is coming from, but it's also not about empowering young people to find the answers themselves.
Yeah. Well,
and there might be disagreement on that, actually. What were you going to say?
Well, I was just remembering the visualizer that Martha mentioned. We were all very struck by that. I didn't actually think it would be as extreme as it was. I did think we would see more teaching, and perhaps that was, the time of day that we came, but the teacher literally stood there with a projector. The projector could see their hand with the piece of paper like this, so the kids could all see the hand, and then a gap, and the kids all had to fill the gap, and then it was the next thing with another gap.
The children had exactly the same booklet in front of them, didn't they?
Really?
I think so. I think this is the idea of this way of learning, is that what the teacher has got in front of them matches exactly what the young people have got. I could be wrong. There's probably different approaches to this, but yeah, there's basically a sentence with what is the missing word or phrase.
It did look so boring. I mean, it felt boring to listen to for us as well, but it was very boring.
And I think, people have different opinions about like different learning styles. I know some of them have been slightly debunked, but I guess maybe about 10, 15 years ago, it was all the rage to think about kinesthetic, visual, auditory learners. And I just feel like that specific style of learning is just, it's appropriate for one type of person, but I don't know if it would really allow everyone to absorb the information in the same way.
There's definitely one approach, wasn't it? Yeah. Okay, so yes, there was another form of shall we call it dialogue? Let's see.
What does dialogue mean?
Yeah, where the teacher would say, before asking for hands up, they'd often say, turn to your partner, and then, well, something would happen. Let's show it. So I want you to think, right, what's the weather like today? I want you to hold the answer in your heads. And then turn to your partner in 3, 2, 1, go.
The weather is
It's
really
hot
sunny and it's
today,
really hot, and
getting a
I'm
bit
finding it
overwhelmed
really.
by it.
And then they say, so what's the weather like today? And everyone's hands would go up really quick. So the point of showing this is that I think we're all quite surprised at these moments. Suddenly the classroom, I was going to say erupts, but it's not exactly like a vibrant moment. It's just intense because all the young people turn to someone and kind of shout at them, or just say the thing that's already in their head. I didn't see anyone saying nothing. I don't know if they mime or something, but we noticed that even when there was someone off maybe, or there was like a group of 3 sitting in a row, and 2 of them turned to each other, and the third person just turned to the back of the head of one of the others and still spoke to the back of the head.
And if someone was ill
Yeah.
next to you and
Yeah.
there was a space, you would turn to the space and you would speak to the space.
Wow. Yes. Yeah. And so we were really thinking, what's going on here? I think you asked one of our guides, and she said, well, it's not really to listen. It's not because you're having a conversation, and it's not actually to learn the answer from your partner. It's just to rehearse what you're about to say when you put your hand up. Is that right?
She did say that. And I also asked Catherine about
Yeah.
it. I asked
So we'll
Catherine about
put
it twice, actually.
We'll put the clip in.
Okay.
Let's see what Catherine had to say about it.
Well, they're speaking to each other, so they can understand what the other one is saying.
They understand.
Yeah, of course they do.
Yeah. Maybe
Yeah.
it's that they like drill. They are used to that kind of environment. I found it hard. I was trying to listen to things, and I found it hard to understand. But I assume, so they really know what each other are saying.
Well, also, if they're speaking to each other. If you're trying to listen from over there, it's more difficult.
Yeah, I see that. I'm sure some of the kids are learning from each other. Maybe the ones that like talk a little bit like quietly enough for them to understand each other. But we saw kids literally shouting in each other's faces, or children who weren't actually talking to a partner because the partner didn't exist. So those kids are not learning from each other.
I mean, I would say it's nigh on impossible to have a genuine conversation within 10 seconds, firstly, and in that environment of just everyone speaking at the same time. Like, you could barely hear yourself think. So this idea, I think Catherine phrases it as like they do a bit of chatting. It's not chatting by most people's standards. It's speaking at someone, and
It clearly works because what it does is it prepares the young people to answer the question that the teacher has asked. That's where it works.
Okay. I haven't worked in a secondary school for a few years, but I have before this, and I know you have too. And I never saw this happen when I was working in secondaries before. I don't know if it's widespread now. I don't know if it's a thing. I guess it's backed up by like their cognitive science interest in working memory. So it may be a way of getting the knowledge to stick, like you said. But what I was used to seeing more often was a teacher say, give them much longer, basically, to have a genuine discussion about quite a meaty question or topic. I think the problem is, and this is where Michaela has sort of swooped in and answered some very pressing questions. Whether we agree with their answer or not, we'll see. But the problem is that in those lessons, a lot of the time, the teacher would say, so turn to your partner, or in your groups, discuss the discuss the question of the theme of love in Shakespeare's play Julius Caesar or something, and nothing would happen. Like everyone would just not do it because they actually just either weren't interested or they were a bit tired.
Or you want to have a gossip about something.
Yeah. Actually, that was more common. Was they would do it, but they wouldn't be talking about the question. Yeah.
Or you spend 5 seconds talking about the subject, and then something else happens.
So I think the Michaela approach is a symptom of the fact that this other thing, which has been tried for a long time, wasn't really working. And Michaela's come in and said, well, we can answer that by keeping it really quick, telling everyone that they must speak at the same time. It doesn't even matter, and then also telling everyone that we expect their hands to be up. And it's a very different approach.
And that is a central justification to so many of their methods, right? It's that no time is wasted. Like, it's all dedicated to learning, to absorbing knowledge. And I guess, we can't necessarily argue with that.
Yeah, and it's the point I want to make, actually. I was going to make it earlier, but there are loads of... So say if you walk into a secondary school and there is absolutely no engagement from young people, and they're just having conversations about other stuff, and teacher might as well not be there, they might as well not be there. That is not good for them. Like that is definitely an issue. And it's, it particularly hits
disadvantaged students worse. Like it's neglect, basically. It's like educational neglect. Those classrooms that just don't function and learning isn't going on. And I think Catherine knows them well. And this is her solution, basically, to that problem. I have a completely different idea of what the solution is. And we'll get to that a little bit later on. But there is definitely a problem. And Michaela comes in and answers it in quite a seductive and rapid fire way. Yeah.
Expecting more of children is good. They love you for it. And in 1950, I wouldn't have had to explain that. Whereas now, I do.
Yeah, we've already discussed a bit that Michaela has a very traditional pedagogy. It does like to say that it's a kind of 1950s style education. It's very open about that. There's no shame for them in that. She's interested in a traditional and traditionalist, quite conservative curriculum too. So she's defended the primacy of like teaching dead white men because she says that's the stuff that people are still talking about. That's the stuff that matters. I don't know if you had.
I like how we've just stopped calling her Catherine, started calling her she, like a god of some kind.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think of that? Like, this stuff is the best stuff to teach because it's influential. It's been influential. She says, but despite the fact they're dead, we're still talking about them. So there must be something to it.
You want to teach the dead white men. The thing I always think that's interesting about dead white men is everybody always concentrates on the white bit and on the men bit, when actually the bit that's most important is the dead bit. They're dead. That's why we want to teach them. Shakespeare's been dead for 400 years, and he's been influencing literature for 400 years, which is why he's interesting. The guy who's writing right now, I mean, maybe one day he'll be really interesting in 400 years, but right now it's Shakespeare who's the guy we should be teaching.
It's not a completely stupid argument.
It's not. I feel a little bit like it's a self-fulfilling argument, though.
Well,
it's kind of tautological. Exactly. It's like, of course, we're still talking about them because they're taught in schools. So if you choose to teach something and you choose to make that like the most important thing to teach through schooling, then of course everyone is still going to be talking about those things. It's like, and then that justifies you teaching it again because.
Well, exactly, because people are still talking about it.
Yeah.
I just think, I mean, maybe this is a bit of a weak answer, but my sense of these things would be that everything is a bit about balance and moderation. And it's like, do you have to focus only on the canon and only on, I say the canon in inverted speech marks, but dead white men, fine, there are some important learnings there, but there are also important learnings from alive Black women. And like, I don't know, I just... potentially a bit of a weak argument, and we don't necessarily have space for everything on the curriculum, but I just think balance is super important.
Yeah.
I think that when we choose our curriculum, we're attempting to pick things that help us to teach young people about stuff that helps them with their life. So when we talk about some of Shakespeare's plays, they're helping us to have conversations with young people about power and about the fear and about writing structure. And I think what Catherine misses is that material is not so objectively such objective quality that it must be that content which enables us to teach those things.
It's saying it's like a vehicle for having the right kind of conversations or learning about the right kind of ideas or themes or...
Often. And there's a clip that we could put in here actually of Catherine talking about teaching about a drag queen's poetry.
They don't do any teaching of Shakespeare anymore, and instead they teach the works of the drag queen Panty Bliss. Now, I have a problem with that. I mean, this is ridiculous that we're teaching the works of Panty Bliss. I mean, look, I don't have anything against Panty Bliss, and he wants to write stuff, that's great. The idea that this is somehow better than Shakespeare is mad. And if you don't think that, at the very least, you can recognize that Shakespeare has been influencing literature for 400 years. So if you want children to have a cultural understanding of where they come from, of their country and so on, you've got to teach dead white men. Those are the people who were writing back then.
What Catherine can't see here is that that poetry is likely enabling that school to teach about other stuff. It's not just the fact that that is of such quality that they're like, our children have to know about it. It's that it's setting up conversations about inequality. It's setting up conversations that help young people to probably learn about different parts of history. Like, yes, that's queer history, but it is a bit of history, you know, other people's experiences and empathy. So that's why we choose curriculum. It's not just because, oh, this is the best thing out there, so it has to be that. It's not that simple.
That's really interesting. There is definitely a different argument, which is with such little space to teach children, young people, we need to be really careful what we select. We've got to teach them the best bits of our culture, or we've got to teach them the best examples of fictional writing and the most significant moments from history. That's a lot of people's approach, I think, to education. And then you're talking about something quite different.
Then there's this whole idea that, I mean, I get the sense from Michaela that they want curriculum to almost be static. It's like it exists in a certain space, in a vacuum that is not relevant to any kind of new knowledge or emerging forms of doing things that still happen today. And it's like, if you just create that sort of bubble around a curriculum, I mean, what if we had done that before Shakespeare was writing, or before like people they have included today on their curriculum were around? It's like, that's just not the way to do these things.
Tom Bennett's work focuses on behaviour management and discipline in schools, and he advised the UK and Australian governments. He's a huge fan of Michaela, and here speaks about how impressed he is with the learning there.
I remember the first time I went to Michaela, and they were great. They said, talk to any child you want. You know, there's no secrets here. Walk into any classroom. And I spoke to this completely just randomly chosen child. I said, what are you studying? And and she was in year 7, right? So fairly young. And she said, we're doing Julius Caesar. And I said, oh, that's interesting. I'm thinking that's quite a steep text for somebody in year 7. I said, do you know any lines from Julius Caesar? And she recited this entire monologue from Caesar. And I thought, that was, you know, that's just drill and kill. That's just memorizing. That's just rote learning, you know. I said, what does it mean? And she says, oh, Caesar's wrestling with the idea of what it means to be a tyrant. And I said, all right, okay, what does a tyrant mean? And she went, oh, it's an unjust ruler, or somebody who rules, you know, in a cruel and evil way. And I thought, okay. She understands this piece of text. You know, there's no getting away from this. She hasn't just memorized this like some kind of floating talking machine.
There's more to Michaela than, well, they would say there's more to Michaela than exam success. So we cover this a little bit in some other episodes, but they talk about educating people in a way which gives them self-discipline and teaching them to be responsible, grateful.
Some of the things that I say very much annoy our progressive detractors, because I say that small c conservative values work, that a small c conservative school is what's best for children, values like personal responsibility, a sense of duty towards others, self-sacrifice on a personal level for the benefit of the whole. These are all things that don't sit well. We are obviously very much anti-critical race theory, anti-gender ideology, and anti-division of children according to their gender or race or sexuality.
So she wants young people to grow up with a sense that that form of relating to each other is really important. You know, that you sort of take care of each other, but maybe you take care of like yourself and the people closest to you first.
Like J.D. Vance.
Is he?
That is what J.D. Vance said recently when he got into some dispute with the Pope, right? About
family values.
Yeah, and about how J.D. Vance was saying you take care of your own first, and then after that comes wider society. I would push back a little bit on that though, because this is something I haven't quite squared in my understanding of Michaela, because they do speak a lot about the school community and contributing to the school community. And in The Power of Culture, Michaela's book, it's constantly referenced like providing for your community. And I think that does go beyond the family. So it's something that maybe doesn't come through in all of Catherine's interviews and all of if we dig a bit deeper into the kind of values she's espousing. But yeah, they do at least kind of give a nod to community quite frequently.
Yeah. There's a tension there, isn't there? Because on the one hand, they talk about being like top of the pyramid, which necessarily means putting yourself above others.
Absolutely,
And they do talk also about, like a fairness amongst
at least a school community, a very tight-knit school community, whether that works or not.
So I suppose we've arrived at something which is maybe a little bit more than just conservative versus progressive. It feels like we could easily slip into saying this is like a left versus right, actually. You know, we brought up J.D. Vance there. He's very firmly on the right of politics. Catherine doesn't describe herself, I don't think, as a right wing.
She describes herself as having small c conservative values.
Small c conservative. A useful little sidestep maybe around like alignment with a particular party. And she's also spoken at Conservative Party conference, hasn't she?
Yeah. And she speaks to many, many right-wing podcasts.
Jordan Peterson and others.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Who's that guy that?
Rob Moore.
That's the one, yeah.
Yeah.
Here's a little clip from Dylan and Hayden, the presenters of Teach, Sleep, Repeat, a podcast about education.
We spend people, small c conservatives like Catherine, for example, will spend a lot of time saying how the woke agenda is nonsense and it's politicized, like you said, without realizing how politicized her position is. And here's one of the biggest issues, with, in my opinion, with what she does, is she tries really hard to pretend she's not political. She'll say she's apolitical, and she'll say no, or I'm going to frame this as it's me caring about the kids. And if you're not within my framing of caring about the kids the way I say this is caring about the kids, then you don't care about the children. And what she's very cleverly doing, I think, is she only talks at conservative conferences. She only went to National Conservative. She's only been to the Conservative Party. In 2010, I saw a speech she did. She is on the right of the political spectrum. Her school is conservative. So when you, again, she's trying to conflate caring about the kids with being conservative. And that I completely and wholeheartedly reject. And what I'm saying is I can have my issues with certain ways you do things and still care about the children. So when you're sat there saying, I'm not on a political spectrum, I'm apolitical. I'm a head teacher who just cares about the kids. This is where I don't mind saying you are wrong. Own the fact you're conservative and then have a debate about it and talk about it and bring people on side or don't. And that's what we live in a society to do.
I think it's fair to say that this is actually quite a right-wing form of education, and she is a right-wing educationalist.
I mean, you only had to look on the walls of Michaela when we went on the tour. Like, they had quotes from Michael Gove, like
pictures of Boris Johnson.
Yeah, there's something inculcated into the messaging there.
But I want to complicate it a little bit, because you can then tend to think, okay, these really traditional pedagogies are right-wing and these really like loose progressive ones are all left-wing. And I think it's not quite that simple. And yeah, so the two don't necessarily go hand in hand. Equally, you can have quite a conservative, you can have a right-wing teacher in a mainstream school who teaches with plenty of discussion and plenty of group work and plenty of project work. Like, that is possible. And I'm sort of saying that because I don't want listeners to think that Michaela are necessarily, that, you know, that the two necessarily go hand in hand. That because she's conservative, she's locked into this way of teaching. It's not really true. In this next section, we speak about some of Michaela's influences. The school owes a lot to philosophers E.D. Hirsch and Michael Young, as well as the politician Michael Gove. E.D. Hirsch talks about cultural literacy. He thinks that young people through schooling should be given not just the information to learn more, but the information and the skills to participate in like a national sense of belonging, in sort of national conversations, dialogues that give you a sense of being from the country that you're living and working in. He's also very interested in selecting the best bits. That the curriculum is kind of, to quote Matthew Arnold, who's like he was obsessed with this idea of culture being the best that man has thought and said. So it's obviously a subjective judgment, but it's treated as if it's objective fact. These are the most important things. These are the most wonderful pieces of writing. These are the most significant moments of history. I think reading, writing, maths are quite good examples, actually, of where there are definitely things that all young people will benefit from knowing. It's obviously a good thing to be able to write. And it's, I think, particularly reading, going back to kind of primary stuff, like how to decode a word, doesn't work for everyone. Phonics doesn't work for everyone, but learning what a word says, and then learning what it means, and then learning what it means in context, and then learning what the meaning is behind the word or behind the phrase. All of these more deeper forms of reading are so valuable. So I'm not against the teaching of forms of knowledge. And I think like very few people would be. But there is a bit of a question about how you acquire that knowledge, like how you read. Does it need to be taught in an exactly prescriptive way? I don't know. Like, can you learn maths through a more exploratory, discovery-based form of learning? Yeah, I think you actually can. And then there's also this question of like, how much of those bits of knowledge, those little packets of information, are actually fundamental are actually like as valuable as we're told they are. And I don't believe that the things that Michaela has selected are just inherently the best bits for everyone to know. People are way too different, obviously, for that to be the case. The next voice you hear is Michael F.D. Young, not to be confused with and no relation to Michael Young, the influential social theorist who wrote significantly about meritocracy. This Michael Young is emeritus professor at UCL, a very big name in education theory, and has had a really significant impact, particularly in the area of curriculum in the UK education system, mainly through his ideas around powerful knowledge. Here he is.
It's not the special privilege of some kids. It's the right of all kids. And somehow or other, we have to develop an education system that makes that possible. And subjects are the best way that schools can do, because they take kids away from their everyday knowledge and give them a chance to, in fact, have access to knowledge that is actually powerful. And what I mean by powerful there is I mean that it enables them to think beyond their experience and not just be trapped by it.
Michael Young's theory of powerful knowledge was really influential to conservative education policy under Gove and then under Nick Gibb. It's also been quite influential to Michaela, whose motto is knowledge is power. It's a little bit of a confusing theory in some ways. It's basically aligned with some E.D. Hirsch thinking, which is that like there are powerful pieces of knowledge, and they're powerful because they allow you to more thoroughly investigate, interrogate the creative in a particular discipline. But it has been taken up in lots of ways that were quite problematic, to the point where Michael Young has had to write lots of revisions or lots of corrections to interpretations of this theory. One is that it started to be assumed that certain subjects, STEM subjects basically, science, technology, engineering and mathematics, were more powerful subjects. And he was never saying that. He was saying that there are powerful knowledges within different subjects. But he went to great lengths to say, like, in the arts and humanities are equally powerful areas of knowledge. And so, yeah, whether you agree with his breakdown of how knowledge should be taught or not, like, it has been misused. I just want to pick up on something about powerful knowledge as well. And this is where I disagree with E.D. Hirsch, Michael Young, Michaela. Like, this idea that there are forms of knowledge that are more powerful than others, I think actually is really problematic. I found the other day there's a college that's closing, and one of the things that people are really unhappy about, or it's changing hands or something, is that this program called Knowledge is Power, so exactly the same phrase that Michaela used, is ending. But this program is all about teaching young Black teenagers about their cultural history, because it feels that schools neglect this, and that's their definition of powerful knowledge. And you know, a lot of people really rate this program. Like, I think, particularly the young people who've gone through it, it's really powerful to know things about your cultural history and your ancestry and your achievements that maybe you didn't learn at school. Like, of course, that's powerful to your sense of identity and belonging and everything, like to your mental health, basically.
I remember being in a classroom and learning about slavery, and one of the young people who was Black turning to me, and he was in year 7, he said, "Why is it that when we learn about Black people, we only ever learn about slavery and negative things?" And I think when you've got a curriculum like Michaela, where Black people aren't seen, you know, the knowledge from Black theorists through history, of which there is as much as there is from white people, well, that if that's not given the same emphasis, then you've got young people like the one in my class who felt that we don't ever celebrate Black people, we don't ever talk about the successes of Black people, we're only going to teach the most important things like slavery.
And Michaela, you know, they do use, they study the autobiography of Malcolm X, they study Maya Angelou, you know, they've made attempts to make their curriculum more diverse. But I think there's a fundamental problem when you have one body of people, i.e. school leaders, selecting what is valuable to teach. And if basically you've got no space in your curriculum for young people to suggest things, and for young people, whether it's in a lesson or in curriculum design, to say, hang on, what about this thing that you've missed out?
What's so dangerous about that?
What's so dangerous about that? It's great.
No, I'm asking you.
Right.
No, I'm asking you, what is so dangerous about young people not having a voice in their curriculum?
Well, it's fine for as long as you've got people selecting, or it's not too bad, as long as you've got people selecting information which is which supports like social justice values and supports inclusion, and maybe that, you know, that does teach like bits of history that were forgotten, and key figures like the black woman who was instrumental in NASA, but you know wasn't talked about for a long time. Like, it's fine as long as you've got the work happening in that curriculum design alongside loads of other things. But there's a fundamental problem with designing your curriculum in that way, because what if in a different moment, under a different set of ideologies, what is now considered important suddenly changes? So this is where I feel like this approach it's not fascism proof. Like, it's not protecting itself against basically co-option by a really authoritarian regime. And different people feel differently about this, but you know, I don't think we're a million miles away from that actually in some parts of the world, and arguably in England.
I have such a fond memory of my interview with Dr. Kay Sidebottom. She had such a deep conviction and a very felt understanding of what it means for students who attend schools like Michaela. We also spoke about fascism and where forms of it might creep into schooling.
The other thing that's worth thinking about in terms of the micro-level fascism is people like Foucault, Deleuze-Guattari, those kind of theorists would say, well, we all have an intrinsic love of power. You know, there's an actual fascist inside us all somewhere. And that's why people will blindly follow these kind of movements, because people would have a desire for it. And that's something, again, that we don't really think about very much, or we might try and push away a little bit. But I think everyone has had moments where they have enjoyed feeling powerful or having power over others. I know I have. And, you know, you might say, oh, no, okay, we shouldn't be proud of that. But it's worth thinking about. What is our own love of power? What's our own desire for it? You know, how much do we also desire our own oppression? You know, you look at how people follow certain political groups that doesn't benefit them. So what are they doing? Why are they wanting to buy into that? So these very subtle fascist inclinations that we have, you know, why do we have this desire for power? When do we feel powerful? What does it make us feel like to implement these rules? Again, I think those are really important questions for teachers to ask themselves. You know, how do I feel about that? And where do I find pleasure? Where can I find pleasure that isn't a fascistic kind of pleasure? And how can we do more of that? I think those are interesting questions.
If the state gets hold of something which is so didactic in what it teaches and how, then it can teach whatever it wants as fact, and that is obviously like incredibly harmful, and that is the way that fascist ideas are disseminated, and that's the way that you get a lot of people on side with potentially disastrous ways of thinking. Yeah.
As we come towards the end of this episode, Martha, Mario and I discuss some of the strengths and weaknesses of the learning at Michaela. We also hear from Andreas Schleicher, who is Director for Education and Skills at the OECD. He initiated and oversees PISA, a very influential tool that aims to compare education systems globally. Basically, he's a big deal if you're into statistical analysis of education. We saw lessons that were I'll go first. We saw lessons that were very efficient. They were very well performed, let's say. They were quick. They were full of knowledge, I think. You know, they were like...
You didn't agree with one of the answers?
No, I didn't agree with that.
Sorry, but we're doing fours.
No, that's good. That's good. I don't know. I saw a mistake, basically, about monotheistic religions and how they missed two. But, but you know, this stuff matters, actually. But if this is their primary focus, then they need to really get it right. I'm not convinced that they do.
Have you got fours?
Yeah. What else?
I've got a 4 in that, well, I mean, I was impressed by the level of energy and kind of I mean, maybe you were touching on it before, but the pace, the rapidity of what was going on in the classroom, I felt like I would never be able to keep up with it. And I was quite impressed that the teachers and students could equally perform at that level. It did get me thinking, though, about people who maybe have special educational needs or think slightly differently, and whether that performance would be possible for them, and if it was possible, whether they would actually be taking in the knowledge through that style of learning. Something that is interesting, though, is when you look at Michaela's Ofsted reports, they do say that people with special educational needs are very well supported and tend to have more tailored support, and maybe there's something that we didn't see in these classrooms. Obviously, Ofsted, we can critique it and it doesn't necessarily capture the whole picture, but it's something to acknowledge.
I agree with you both. Clearly, this school know how to get kids to remember stuff.
It's true.
And we will remember our time there.
Yeah. There's a few of our interviewees actually picked up on things that they liked as well. So here's Andreas Schleicher about the value of structure that Michaela provides.
What struck me is that I generally met happy children there. Children who knew why they were there, who were engaged in what they were doing, very different than what I expected from what I had heard about the school. Again, what I had heard was about, it's very kind of oppressive kind of school climate, very kind of strict, very disciplined, and so on. And in a sense, it was that. But I also, when I saw it from the inside, I saw that the kind of structure the school provided to learners was actually helping them.
I think there's probably quite strong self-discipline. There was some self-marked homework that we were told about. And if you're really getting young people to self-mark their homework, it's quite good. It's quite impressive. You can then, you can learn a lot through doing that.
Teachers, in terms of teaching and learning, I do believe that those teachers are a pretty unified team. I think they know what they're doing at work, and I think that is, we have to ask, what does that mean? What are they doing there? I think that's a success for the school.
I also think that we saw some quite impressive ambition that was mostly orientated towards exam success, but on the way to that, you can also end up becoming really interested in subjects. So, if your ultimate goal is to do well in exams, but through that you're reading a really interesting book, and you actually just find yourself being grabbed by that book or by this element of science or this part of maths, then you're doing some good learning as well for its own sake. So I think some of that will inevitably be going on. Okay, but then let's get a bit more critical. What is not going so well in Michaela lessons?
So something I really have some
I want to go first.
Pages of notes.
Something that I have some doubts about is this idea that you can just fill these empty vessel young people up with loads and loads of knowledge, and then at the end of that process they will be able to just be creative off the back of that knowledge. After being kind of receptive for so long, they then are expected to be productive off the back of that. I guess I've got doubts about whether that actually can happen, even from a personal perspective. If you're constantly told about how other people have done things prior to you lose that sense of naivety and maybe the ability to take risks and think of things yourself.
One of my main worries about Michaela is that those bricks that they've got, those bits of knowledge, are from a very small area of what knowledge is. So they feel very strongly that they're kind of touching on the really kind of important bits of knowledge that we've all kind of agreed on in society. Whereas I really disagree. I think they're missing huge amounts of what it is to know things. So the knowledge that we have from being on a sports team and the knowledge of our bodies that gives us, we might call this embodied learning. If everyone thinks back to when they were at school and maybe they were in DT and they sawed a piece of wood, or what else can we think of, when they were in art and they used a paintbrush, that was learning just as much as when they were in maths in front of a whiteboard as well.
Yeah, there's so much that we can learn through physical touch. You understand what a material is or how heavy something is by holding it. You're not just told that it weighs this amount. And it's also a very inefficient way of learning, actually. For example, how far about how far away something is. It's we learn that through walking, or we learn in
going there.
Yeah, and these are embodied knowledges that we're acquiring all the time.
I think Kay also speaks to you about
She does.
this.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think bodies aren't really talked about very much in schooling. We have this emphasis now in a lot of kind of mainstream schools around kind of cognition and memory, you know, all of this thing about, you know, we have to, I think Ofsted said it, you know, learning is about memorization. It's about having things stored in long-term memory, things like that. So, you know, we have this mind-body split, that classic Descartes thing where people are interested in the mind and what we can fill the mind with, how we can get people to retain information, and we do practices like interleaving and all of those kind of things in our pedagogy, forgetting that we're embodied, you know, as well as embrained. You know, we're all part of the same system. So the body, I think, unless the body's out of place or being naughty or unruly in some way, bodies don't really get talked about. They're kind of an inconvenience, and you've only got to look at the way things like toilets are regulated in schools to realise that, you know, children not having access to a toilet, you know, being penalised for leaving lessons, or, you know, all of these kind of things, I think is really interesting. And also the way in which things like lunch times, break times have been eroded, you know, by huge amounts over the last kind of 20, 30 years. I mean, I was at school a long time ago, but I remember having an hour and 10 minutes for my lunch break. You know, I could go home, or I could sit on the field and have really long conversations, do other things maybe that I shouldn't have been doing, but whatever. You know, having that time to actually be in the body, whether it, you know, it's walking around school with your friends or whatever it happens to be.
The idea that there is just one science of learning is not true. You know, there are lots of different theories about how young people's minds work and about how we learn. The one that Michaela has chosen is this quite traditional idea that you drill things and you repeat them, you recite them, you test them so that they get stuck in long-term memory.
Can I just re-emphasize this here, because it's really important for listeners? Quite a lot of people on the traditional end of education seem to believe that it is a field, a discipline, a science that we've all agreed on, that we're done, that we you know, scientists went out with their calculators and their clipboards and they found out how we learn. Now we know, so can everyone shut up about anything else?
Yeah, the science they talk.
I find that really surprising that people are taken in by this in a way, because what other science are we just kind of done with? Like, that's not how learning and knowledge and understanding and development works. But for some reason, there's this narrative where we're telling people there's one way to teach people. However, what Alfie Cohn points out, who I also interviewed, there may well be a best way to get people to do well on a very specific outcome, like GCSEs.
Well, this is what Stephen Wall says when he kind of says, well, of course they have amazing grades. They've orientated their whole approach, their pedagogy, their curriculum, basically everything towards achieving grades. We shouldn't be surprised. Next, you're going to hear a little clip of an interview with Professor Stephen Ball. Now, Stephen Ball may not be a household name, but within the field of sociology of education and education studies more widely, he's a really big deal. So we were very lucky to be able to talk to him. He's actually the former Carl Mannheim Professor of Sociology of Education at the Institute of Education at UCL. Here he is.
And people say, well, yes, look how effective the school is. And she says, look how effective the school is. But that's obvious in a way. If you organise your school around an emphasis that is entirely related to performance outcomes, you will get good performance outcomes. What gets neglected in all that is what else is being neglected by the school, what is not being done. And what is not being done is creativity and ingenuity and flexibility and cooperation and the ability to work in groups and criticality. I mean, there's no room for criticality in Michaela. The knowledge is fixed, the teacher has it, and it's transmitted to the students. The questioning is entirely one way. The teacher asks the questions, the students answer while sitting up straight and paying attention and behaving. And again, say what I said before, I think that's totally irrelevant to the needs of young people facing the future that is confronting us.
I did a quick search before we started this episode, things that were taught in the 90s that we now know not to be true. And there are loads, of course there are loads. You know, what is seen as truth and fact changes over time. Mm-hmm. It used to be said that neurons couldn't, I'll get the wording wrong, but basically that brains didn't really develop past childhood.
He's not a science teacher.
You can tell. I'll insert the fact here. But yeah, like, and this has been debunked. We now know that adult brains continue to form new connections, and it's called like neurogenesis happens into adulthood, which is interesting in relation to this whole conversation, actually, because it's not that you need to fill up their little brains while they're children. You can allow their brains to be changing. You should be setting their brains up to change throughout the whole of their life, to learn beyond school.
We'll end with the voice of a former Michaela student reflecting on this episode's theme. Their anonymity has been respected, and their words are brought to life by an actor. Across the series, they share both positive and negative memories of school. We approached several Michaela graduates, but only one agreed to take part in an interview. Their account is not presented as representative of all Michaela young people.
The teaching quality in the lower school was really strong, and it was really easy to grasp difficult concepts. The classrooms were always quiet with no disruptions, which created a very good learning environment. We never had supply teachers, which was very helpful. Our teachers were always in, consistently teaching well, and it definitely had a very positive influence on our academic performance. The school days were exhausting. The workload was overwhelming, and at the same time, there were the Michaela standards and expectations. There was so much homework every day and quizzes every day as well. At times, especially when you got to year 9, 10 and 11, GCSEs were everything, and it felt like nothing else mattered. It was hard to decompress after a long day because we always had the workload on our minds, plus quiz revision for the following day, every day. It felt like we were machines. We would work until late at night, revise till late, go to bed late, and then be expected to be on top form in lessons the following day and hand in extension work on top of regular work. There were consequences if you weren't. It was a minimum 5 hours for the regular homework, then longer for the extension. So obviously, with how exhausted we were, it took even longer to complete the work to a high standard than it normally would have. Just to mention, not all those hours were productive. Not getting enough rest meant it was harder to learn the information, and the whole process took so much longer. Another example is that some evenings we would be given around 120 flashcards to revise for an English quiz. We would have to know the flashcards word for word, otherwise we would fail it. We were repeatedly learning the same flashcards, but every week there were still gaps in our knowledge. It was just too much, and if we didn't know the answer in lessons, the teacher would yell at us and tell us that we would get a grade 4 in the exam, which was embarrassing, considering the class we were in and the level we were at. Everyone was already stressed about the exams, so it was just unnecessary, I think, to say all that during a lesson. Most adults nowadays don't even work that long and prioritise work-life balance in the workplace. So it feels so strange to me, reflecting on all of it now, that we were expected to work such long hours at such a young age, including weekends and holidays. Lots of people, including myself, were so burnt out, it's hard to imagine myself feeling that exhausted ever again.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Graded. Please share this episode with a friend so we can continue this conversation. It really helps the podcast.